Well, g'day flatties and globe defenders. This is Critical Think from Down Under. Today we're going to look at a video from Taboo Conspiracy. This is one in his Flat Earth Fact series. German bombing beams proved the Earth is flat. Well, of course not. I've suggested a better title for the video is I don't understand radio wave propagation and I love to misquote and cherry pick. Therefore, the Earth is flat. Of course, I am indeed blocked on this channel, and as you can see by Taboo Conspiracy's header on all of his videos these days, he wants to preserve the echo chamber. Some other interesting things here. This guy's a bit of a Fruit Loop. Look at the language he's using. So anyone who disagrees with him is a troll. He somehow thinks that these people who disagree with him are paid to, and using the word troll there, I think he thinks that we're making up stuff, but, we're just correcting him and pointing out his mistakes. And also, this is one marvellous piece of projection. As I said, insane globe zealots. Well, we know who the zealots are, and acting like nothing better to do than attack flat earthers. Well, if you think that correcting your mistakes and pointing out where you're wrong is attacking, well, then my advice to you is don't publish false information on the internet. It's very easy, then no one will have anything to say. And here is his stipulations of rules, very interesting. No spamming, no personal insults, no linking to propaganda videos. So what do we get when flat earthers come to our channels? We get spamming, we get personal insults. The first thing they do is link to some flat earth propaganda video. So it's perfectly okay for flat earthers to do these things, is it? But it's not okay for someone to bring truth to your channel? And stay relevant to the topic at hand. What a joke! How many times do these flat earthers come to our channel and change the topic? And the other one, treat everyone here, especially my friends, with respect and kindness. I have to tell you, I don't know many flat earthers that would come to my channel and other Glober channels and treat people with respect and kindness. It doesn't happen. Here's a summary of Taboo's claims at the end of his video.
Only under the flat earth model could the knickebein system work, and the globe propagandists have no counter-argument but to lie and claim that the bombers were somehow in line of sight of the knickebein towers when that would have been mathematically impossible. German bombing beams proved there is no Earth curvature.
Well, of course, the Earth is curved. This is an indisputable scientific fact. And no, the German bombing beams did not prove this. But I'll go over these things one by one, and the evidence will be forthcoming in this video. He says that only under a flat Earth model could the knickebein system work. Well, I thought the flat Earth had no model. So what's going on here? Certainly has no working model. So how can some people claim the flat Earth has a model and other people claim that it has a model now? Well, whatever you need to suit the argument, right? And with the correct analysis and facts, then you can see that this statement is false. And the globe realists, I've said realists, I haven't used his word, which is an emotive term, and silliness really. The globe realists have no counter-argument. Well, that's a lie, and he did say that that's a lie. And what follows here is the counter-argument. And the knickebein towers line of sight is not possible. Now, I'm going to show this to be false, and also, on top of that, line of sight is not essential for the beams to be detected. The conclusion that these beams somehow proved the Earth has no curvature, based on scientific evidence, this is an incorrect conclusion. And also it's plain to see that only a religious zealot would make such a claim. using this word impossible, based on faulty research and denial of scientific facts. So let's go through and check how many items on the bingo card apply to this video of Taboo Conspiracies. Now, I've checked all bar not doing the math and getting the maths wrong. Now, I was a bit iffy about getting the maths wrong because, of course, he uses the curve calculator that doesn't factor in refraction. Some would say that that's classed as getting the maths wrong, but it's probably just under the topic of bad science and making the wrong assumption because there is refraction. We have an atmosphere. That's a fact. I'll give some background information here. In the Second World War, the Germans developed this wonderful system. It was pretty clever, where they beefed up the Lorenz instrument landing system and they built this huge antenna. First of all, they built two of them, one at Cleve and one at Stolberg that you can see there. And these were the big version of the knickebein system. They built those first and they shot their super strong and super focused signal out, and an aeroplane could fly in the path of one of these signals, just the same they would do with an instrument landing system. It was the same technology, same tones, and then eventually they'd cross the signal from the other station, and that's where they would know to drop their bombs. And of course the distances, even from the most west part of Germany there, were quite significant, and the curvature of the Earth needed to be a factor. And I'm pretty sure that the Germans didn't know whether this would work either, but they sent out planes and recorded whether the signal was there or not. And some of these reports back to headquarters were intercepted by British intelligence. So British intelligence, along with other information from various sources, started to suspect that the Germans had such a system because they were way ahead of the Brits in terms of this technology, and the Brits had to work out how to catch up. So to sum up his argument, these distances between these stations and Derby are not line of sight on a globe. And I agree with that, they are not line of sight. However, there are a lot of other factors to take into account. There is no evidence in any of the material that these radio beams from these stations were actually intercepted at Derby. Now, there are a few other places mentioned, and they did send out a plane to try and find these signals. And what they did at the point of interception, they did direction finding on these signals, and they did find that they intersected at Derby, but they weren't actually at Derby at the time that they were looking at these signals. So there's no evidence to confirm or deny that these signals were both present at Derby at the same time. I've been through all the material and I couldn't find it. The other downfall of the argument is that the knickebein system consisted of many other stations, not just these two here. So these two have been cherry-picked, as they are the furthest away, but there were a lot of other stations there that are a lot closer, and you could indeed get line of sight to a large part of the southern continent there. So to say that line of sight is not possible, that's just incorrect.
But Lindemann and others said such a targeting system would be impossible because the supposed curvature of the Earth would block the high-frequency beams, because VHF waves do not even allegedly bend around the curvature of the Earth.
Now, he's used words there, they'd never said anything of the sort. They said something like that, but Taboo Conspiracy has introduced all these emotive terms like impossible, supposed, alleged, and none of those words were used. So this is just TC trying to make a case using these emotive terms, hoping to persuade you rather than looking at the facts. So let's hear a little bit more of this from the original BBC documentary.
Dr. Jones took the message to Professor Lindemann, his old tutor and now scientific advisor to Winston Churchill, and tried to persuade him of the serious threat posed by the knickebein beams. But Lindemann was not convinced, pointing out that at the high frequencies necessary for an accurate beam, the curvature of the Earth would prevent its being directed against targets in Britain.
So let's look at that. Lindemann was not convinced. He did not say it was impossible. He's saying that at the frequencies that he thought you would need to get an accurate beam, the curvature of the Earth would prevent it being directed against targets in Britain. You see the word impossible in there? Not at all. It was an opinion that he thought it would not work. And, that's a valid consideration. However, they were not experts in radio propagation, so they couldn't say for sure. In one of the books that has the history of the war, they said there in this book, Professor Lindemann initially did not accept this theory, as he doubted whether a beam on 30 megahertz would follow the surface of the Earth at the required ranges. Now, he expressed a doubt. He did not say it was impossible. So he was sceptical, yes. So in terms of it being possible or not being possible, there's a text here, and it's from the Institute of Radio Engineers. These guys know what they're talking about. And it's an article published in 1937. Now, it says ultra-shortwave propagation along the curved Earth's surface. Okay. Now, there's an asterisk here, and if you follow the asterisk there, it's actually translated from German. So the Germans knew before the war that they could propagate radio waves over the curve. And in this paper, I'll just try and find the relevant bits. They talked about diffraction over the Earth's curve and everything. They did some calculations on expected field strengths. They sent out planes, and they found that in this case, there's the propagation. They could measure it out to 400, 500 kilometres, depending on the altitude of the plane. Now, this smacks of curvature, doesn't it? If the Earth were flat, it wouldn't matter what your altitude was. So they showed by theory and by measurement that the radio waves could be detected over the curve of the Earth. So that was what this article was all about. There was another article in a subsequent edition in 1938, and the ultra-shortwave guide ray beacon and its application. And in this article, they found out that ultra-shortwave can work in longer range distances. So it talks here about the investigation of propagation results in the possibility of long-range navigation by means of ultra-shortwave beacons. The experiments made in Australia gave very encouraging results. So again, people did experiments and they confirmed that it's possible for over-the-horizon propagation. Not only that, these days we have high-frequency over-the-horizon radars and everything. So it's not like... it's just well known by the people who actually know. I hate to break it to you, Taboo Conspiracy, but there are some people in the world who are a lot smarter than you. They not only do they know how to tie their shoelaces, but they're expert in radio propagation. And they would totally disagree with you that shortwaves cannot be detected over the horizon. It's not because the Earth is flat. Now listen to this.
But knickebein did work, and English lives were lost as Churchill's scientific advisors couldn't believe in the VHF knickebein system when the Earth's curvature should have made it impossible.
Right, this part is a really disgusting piece of work by Taboo Conspiracy. He's implying that people died because of this curvature of the Earth issue. This is a pretty disgusting tactic, and this is the kind of low level that you have to stoop to in order to make your case for a flat Earth. He's accusing the scientists of one of two things: Number one, they don't know what they're talking about. They've been brainwashed to think the Earth is a globe, which is ridiculous. I mean, they're there to fight a war. They're there to fight a war. Would you trust someone to fight a war for you if they didn't know that the Earth was a globe or not? The other thing is that people say it's a conspiracy. The globe is a conspiracy. So you'd think that they would let people die. And just imagine in the war room. Excuse me, Mr. Churchill, we think that the Germans have a navigation beam that they can use to target their bombers over our country. Oh, well, wait a minute. Shouldn't we just continue to pretend that the Earth is a globe for a while? Look, don't worry about defending the country and stopping the Germans from taking over and having all our citizens killed. It's more important to defend the conspiracy of the globe. We have to just wait a while we think about, it couldn't possibly happen because of the globe. Don't worry about it. If we lose the country and a few people die, what's far more important? The other thing is, in the heat of the moment in the war, I mean, why would you even bother to say, the Earth curvature might get in the way? If there was no Earth curvature, you wouldn't even mention it. You just get on with the business of war. Oh, this is so ridiculous.
Very high frequency requires a direct line of sight. Wikipedia confirms the same as it reads, as the transmitters were more or less in line of sight to high-altitude bombers.
I'll show more about this in a little while, but this is a cherry-picked and out-of-context quote mine, and we'll get on to that.
This article here confirms it as well.
So just to be clear here, this is an article. This is not a scientific paper or pretends to be. It's an article by some dude who's collected a lot of historical information and put up hundreds of web pages. And in this case, I believe he's got it wrong. And I'll be writing to this guy and asking that he make a correction here, because the sentence, I think, is a little bit malformed, and what perhaps he was meaning to say was that Lorenz is limited by line of sight and has a few hundred meters maximum range, and that would be correct for the Lorenz landing system. However, the knickebein is not necessarily limited by line of sight, but it works a lot better if you have line of sight. So they did send out planes, they did detect it over the line of sight. Both the English and the Germans sent out planes, and the Germans would have done that first, of course, and then the English intercepted some of the communications of the results of these tests.
Very high frequency requires a direct line of sight.
Now, I've already shown that calculations and tests confirm that very high frequency does not necessarily require a line of sight. So this whole argument is blown out of the water for two reasons. That is one reason, very high frequency doesn't necessarily require line of sight. Of course it would work a lot better, but it's not necessary. And the other thing now, we'll go on to the Wikipedia quote mine. In here, this is the sentence. It was subsequently realised that the argument over whether the beams would bend around the Earth was entirely academic, as the transmitters were more or less in line of sight to high-altitude bombers. Now, this is true. They had other knickebein stations, not just those two that you've cherry-picked there. There were other stations on the coast of France, just across the English Channel. And were they in line of sight? Yes, they were. Yes, they were. So this is saying you've got to understand the timeline here. This was subsequently realised. Now, in the first place, they only had two knickebein transmitters, and they started detecting them in June, around about the 21st of June 1940. that's when the Germans took over France. And they very shortly built more knickebein stations on the coast of France. Why would the Germans bother to build them there? They can be easily bombed from England. Of course they're going to build them there to be closer so they get better line of sight. And then that was subsequent. So the argument about whether the beams would bend around the Earth or not were not so important because they were more or less within line of sight. Wikipedia didn't lie. Now, they quoted this reference, number 13, which Hinsley, 1979. I looked up this reference. And that's this book, British Intelligence in the Second World War. And here's a list of the knickebein stations. And you can see there's a total of 12 operational stations. There was a 13th that never got finished. So many of those stations are within line of sight of a large part of the target area. So when they first discovered knickebein, here they say other stations, frequencies and procedures were soon identified. So you see here another Wikipedia bit of information. Following the fall of France in June 1940, additional transmitters were installed on the French coast. Stations were also constructed in Norway and the Netherlands. Of course, the Norway station was too far away, but the Netherlands wasn't too far. So, again I say, why would the Germans bother to get more stations if the Earth were flat? Why would they bother to put the stations closer? I mean, if the Earth were flat, those faraway stations would be sufficient and probably out of bombing range. But here now they've got stations there on the coast of France. They could be bombed, and they were bombed. So, unless you wanted better performance because of the curvature of the Earth, you'd have no reason to bring your stations forward. So there's a lot more information in that reference. I won't go through it all here. The points I'm making here is that the stations on the French coast would have line of sight. There's more than 2 knickebein stations, and ultra-short radio waves can propagate over the curve. Well, anyway, thanks for watching, everybody, and hopefully we'll get out a new video when we get time.